Warmest welcome, everyone. I'm going to wait just for a minute as I'm watching many participants join us. So we'll give you just a second to get on here and then we'll get started. Thank you for being with us. Hello, everyone. Warmest welcome. I'm going to wait just another minute as I'm watching numbers go up as people join us for this afternoon's public viewpoint session. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Ruth Watkins. I'm the president of Strada Impact, part of Strada Education Network. I'm delighted to welcome you to this afternoon's discussion focused on student outcomes beyond completion. So I'll give you just a little bit of an introduction and then we'll get right along with some data and some discussion. So what happens to individuals after they graduate with a bachelor's degree in terms of employment, in terms of earnings, in terms of their own perception of value in their degree, and maybe most importantly, in terms of how they feel about their degrees, their own perception of value and their own reflection on the fulfillment of their purpose. What influences those outcomes? Are those outcomes equal for people from different backgrounds? And really, why do we know so little about this? As we think about today's discussion, really focused on these issues and these questions about student outcomes beyond completion, we're going to start by sharing what we've learned. And when I say we, I mean some experts that are with me today. Nichole Torpey-Saboe, who is Director of Research at Strada Impact, Andy Chan, who's Vice President for Innovation and Career Development at Wake Forest, and Aimée Eubanks Davis, who's the founder and CEO of Braven. These folks really are the experts, and you'll get to hear from them about what they've learned and what they think, and what we could do better in higher education. I also hope that we can spark a dialogue with you about creating a new norm of measuring outcomes for our bachelor's degree holders beyond the completion of a degree or a credential, and that we can improve our capacity to address those outcomes, improve those outcomes, and ensure that they are more equitable for more individuals. So with that introduction, I welcome you. I thank you for joining us. I also want to encourage you to be active participants. There's a lot of opportunity for discussion near the end of the session today. And we are monitoring questions in the chat and in other locations. So please do join in, speak up, be a part of it, and get your questions answered today. We welcome hearing from you. So we're going to start with you, Nichole, to give us a little context and background, and then we'll move into the panel.
All right. Thank you so much, Ruth. And you gave a great introduction, so I don't want to repeat that, but just the context of why we undertook this study is really all about understanding and improving the full value of a degree. So first of all, we felt like there was a little bit of a limitation around the ways that we've been measuring and trying to understand that full value. We know how to measure persistence and completion, but when it comes to what happens after someone graduates, there was a lot more there was a lack of information, really. We've been trying to collect information about income and earnings, but we know that that's not the full picture. And especially as we were talking to university presidents and chancellors, they were speaking to us about the need to have a more comprehensive measure about what does a degree mean to someone's life. And earnings are part of it, but there's so much more to it. So how can we better understand and measure that? And then when we understand it and we measure it, then how can we improve it? So once we know what students value and we can see how we're doing, how can we make that even better and make sure that we're delivering equitable value? So that's what this survey project was about. And so far, there have been about 60 colleges and universities who have administered this survey to their alumni. And then what I'm going to present to you today is a national benchmark survey that we ran at the same time so that those universities would be able to have points of comparison to see how they're doing and see where they might have opportunities to improve. So we're excited to share these results and hopefully expand the conversation about the value of a degree. So the first thing that we wanted to understand, if we want to know how to measure value, is what are students looking for? What do they aspire to? and are colleges and universities meeting those student aspirations? So we started off by asking them about what goals were important to them when they chose to pursue education. So what you'll see on this slide, the dark blue is reasons people cited for pursuing education. And then the light blue is whether or not they felt that their college helped them to achieve those outcomes. So there's point out on this slide. And can you guys hear me all right? I had a funny message come up, but okay. So the first one is that make more money is one of the motivations, but there are many motivations. So if you see there in the middle that make more money, that was not even the most frequently cited motivation. So if we stop with only measuring that, then we'd be missing a lot in terms of what students are hoping to get out of their education. We see that career goals are important and they're not exactly the same as making more money. And then on the other side, with the personal side, we see learn new things is a really big strength for colleges and universities. 93% of alumni said that their education helped them to learn new things. So when we're talking about career goals and how colleges and universities can better support students in being prepared for a career, we're not leaving aside all these other essential things that a college education is about. Learning and the personal growth are very important. We're just bringing the career preparation alongside that and saying that's also important to address. So overall, this paints a pretty positive picture. We see the vast majority of students are getting good outcomes here. But unfortunately, underneath this, as you might expect, there are some inequalities. So these numbers aren't equal for all populations, which is what I'm going to show you next. When we looked at these and we cut them by different population groups, the biggest disparities we saw were between Black alumni and white alumni. So they're actually pretty close on the learn new things. They're having strong learning outcomes, but we see gaps when it comes to things like if alumni felt their education helped them to advance in their career or to make more money, to be the best person they could be. Really systematic across the board. You see in every single category, Black alumni are not experiencing the same benefits as white alumni. So this is a real wake-up call that even though we see overall strong numbers, not everyone is experiencing college in the same way. So after we've kind of understood the wide variety of motivations that people have for pursuing education, how can we create a framework for measuring it? We know we can't have a million indicators. How can we sort of create one simple framework that's easy to use, but also captures the complexity of what people are looking for in their education? So what we did is we took 3 measures. One is income. So we looked at whether or not alumni were making at least $40,000, which is about a 20% income boost over the average high school graduate. We looked at whether they said their education was worth the cost, and then whether they said their education helped them to achieve their goals. So hopefully that leaves room underneath for a wide variety of goals, but then they can judge whether or not their education helped them to achieve them. And again, we see strong outcomes. We see 75% making at least that much money, 75% say it's worth the cost, 80% say that it helped them achieve their goals. As you might be expecting, next we're going to look at the equity gaps, and we're going to see those again. So here we looked at students of color compared to white students, first generation students compared to those who had parents who went to college, and then female students compared to male students. And we see on every single one of these outcomes, we see equity gaps here. I was actually surprised on the female students one in particular, because that's an area where we know that female students actually have higher retention and completion rates. But when it comes to these beyond completion outcomes, we're seeing these gaps. So they're not making as much money. They're less likely to feel their education was worth the cost, or their education helped them to achieve their goals. And then what we took is we took these 3 separate indicators and we rolled them up into one. So we can see how people are doing on each one, but what about overall, how many people are achieving all 3 of these? here, the picture is not quite as rosy. So we had 3/4 or more are achieving them individually, but when we put them all together and say, okay, how many alumni are achieving all 3 of these? It was just about half. So still a lot of opportunity for improvement. And then with the equity gaps, we see it's actually even more severe. So female students, for example, are 25 percentage points less likely than male students to achieve all 3 of these outcomes in terms of earnings, worth the cost, and achieving their goals. And then when we break apart further, not just students of color compared to white students, but we look at the Black and white gap between Black alumni and white alumni, you see a 27 percentage point gap in the likelihood of achieving all 3 of these outcomes. So again, overall strengths, but some really sobering equity gaps that we know we need to pay attention to. And in some ways, it's not surprising. We know these exist in access and these exist in completion, but just highlighting that we can't stop there. Even if we solve the access gaps and the completion gaps, we really need to be paying attention to what happens to students after they graduate and how can we make sure those outcomes are equitable as well. So next, we've talked about how to understand that value. So how can we improve it? What can we do? And I'm going to talk about 2 things here. I'm going to talk about experiences on campus, and I'm going to talk about the skills that students are getting while they're enrolled. So first, when it comes to experiences, I'm not going to show you everything we had on the survey. There was a long list of experiences that we asked people about, but I'm going to kind of point out the ones that students said were most valuable, and then the ones that students were getting the least value from. So here at the top, good news is students are saying that their classes and their professors were extremely valuable. We have really strong numbers here for those academic dimensions. On the bottom end are a lot of those experiences about actually connecting their education to a career. So things like project-based learning or career advising, mentoring, internships. In those cases, students were much less likely to say that they had a valuable experience. And a lot of students, if you look at that black bar on the left, are saying not applicable, so they didn't have these experiences at all. So that really highlighted to us where there could be potential gaps, and we wanted to look at what difference does it make if students are having these career-related experiences, since we know that a lot of their goals are career-related. So there's more details in the report, the full report that we have on our website, but we did some statistical modeling to see if you're controlling for a lot of demographic variables, but looking at these connections to career, does it make a difference on outcomes? And so the answer is yes. As you can see here, when students had really weak career-related experiences, those ones I just showed you about internships and mentoring, for example, they are about 59% of students would say that their education helped them to achieve their goals. On the other hand, if they had really, really strong experiences connecting their education to their career, 86% would say that their education helped them to achieve their goals. So we just wanted to highlight the importance of some of these beyond the classroom experiences in terms of students' value. We know academics are foundational. You're not going to get value if you don't have good professors and great classes, but you also need some of these experiences in order to help students achieve the full value of their education. So the last section here, I want to talk about skills. And we wanted to know, we took a look at some of the most in-demand skills in the labor market in terms of job postings. And we put those on the survey. And we also had institutions had the ability to choose additional skills as well. But we're going to highlight the top 10 that are in job postings in terms of skills that employers are looking for and whether or not students say they realize those during their education, those were developed, and if they're being used in the workforce. So here what we see is in the dark blue are whether students say they developed a skill quite a bit or a great deal. And then the light blue is whether they found that to be a valuable skill in the workplace. So the good news here, we're seeing students felt that they developed strong skills in terms of the ability to learn new things, critical thinking and problem solving. And then it kind of gets to a little bit weaker when you get to the right-hand side there, when you're looking at data analysis or digital literacy, and you see some gaps, some opportunities, I think, for universities to say, well, look at digital literacy. You know, almost 70% say that's a really valuable skill in the workplace, but only half of students say that they developed it. So maybe that's an opportunity for a college or university to step in and say, where can we either embed this skill into our curriculum, or in some cases, it might be better explaining to students how they are getting this skill and how what they're doing in the classroom is related to these skills they're going to be using. So the last thing is, we looked at what difference would it make if you have strong digital literacy skills versus weak digital literacy skills. These are students self-assessing their own skills. And so what we see is the vertical axis here is whether their education helped them to achieve their goals. And I thought this was really striking because we hear a lot about, you know, STEM majors doing better on some of these outcome metrics. And we're very agnostic in terms of major, not saying that everyone needs to be a certain major or another, but maybe everyone does need a foundation of certain skills. And what we see here is, for example, a major like visual and performing arts. If students felt like they had weak digital literacy skills, about 62% said their education helped them to achieve their goals. But when they got strong digital literacy skills, that bumps up by 25 percentage points. So that's kind of telling us it's not necessarily about the major, but it might be more about the skills that they're learning alongside that. And also, as we saw earlier, the experiences they're having that help them to link their education to a career. So those are kind of the highlights. We have a lot more in our report on the website. We have some dashboards. I would encourage you to check it out. But I'm just really excited to hand it over to our panelists who have been doing some really innovative things around helping to think about these outcomes beyond completion differently and helping students to have those kinds of experiences that we've been talking about.
Nichole, thank you so much for that very clear and I think provocative presentation. It points us in the direction of where we can have a very lively discussion. So Nichole will stay with us in discussion, and Aimée and Andy here to join us. I'm going to ask just one question about the problem, and then we're going to go on toward actions and solutions and implications and ideas that you all have. I'm also watching the chat a little bit and seeing some of the questions. Thank you for jumping in such a lively way. Well, Aimée, let's start with you, and then I'm going to ask Andy to describe this as well. When you look at these data and your own knowledge and experience, what do you really see as the central problem we need to solve for?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here, because one of the reasons I'm super excited to be here is that, in my opinion, what we were just looking at from a data set standpoint, including through the lens of equity, is one of the most problems I've ever seen in education. And I've been in the world of education for so many years, decades. And why I have so much optimism, so I run an organization called Braven. We partner directly with higher education institutions, particularly ones that do not have a lot of resources. And when I say resources, we think about that through the lens of an endowment. And so we are mainly working with schools at this point that really do not have large endowments in order to feed some of the extracurricular things that they might want to do, like career experiences. And what I would say is we've really seen three things matter in the world of Braven, all of which I think are solvable. One, for students who are fitting, especially in this criteria we were just looking at, as first generation college going. I saw in the chat on the Pell Grant in our demographic group, so families earning $50,000 or less for a family of four, often identifying as Black or Brown, is that one, it's super important to make sure that within the college context, on the academic side, they're actually developing the skills, some of which we just saw, within a course. The second thing we've seen is that it is super, super important for them to actually acquire networks. who you know matters mightily. And so when I see some of the data about mentorship, et cetera, often for high income young people, mentorship, connection to careers is actually coming from their families. It's an invisible set of social capital that we really don't talk about. And then finally, for the students that we've seen and worked with over the last 8 years, and we're now getting up to the world of 5,000, that also whether or not they have the confidence to understand that they should actually be going after jobs in which they earn the entire dollar instead of 66 cents on the dollar. There also has to be real knowledge about the level of employment and the kind of role that they should be seeking initially out the gates from college, because if not, there's a scarring effect. And I won't go on to the research on that front, but basically that scarring effect starts from the moment they get that first job that is not at that full dollar level, and it never goes away. And so those are some of the things, Ruth, that I've seen over the course of our work in the world of Braven, and why I think that this is really one of the more solvable problems we even see on the equity side of education.
So just to recap, you see sort of the central problem as really equalizing the playfield on skills, on networks or social capital, and on confidence and sort of mindset about self. Andy, let's hear from you.
Thanks, Ruth. It's good to be on this panel with Aimée and Nichole. Great work from Strada. Just really appreciate what you're doing to try to move the conversation ahead. One of the things that I really like about the phrasing that Strada is using, which is beyond completion, is that's actually really the point, is that we've created a system in higher ed where it starts with enrollment. Can I get students to my school? If I don't get students to my school, there's going to be a problem because I can't pay my bills, the revenue doesn't come in. But also we're thinking enrollment with respect to the diversity of the types of students we're trying to bring, and how do we create access and manage our budgets to make that work. So enrollment it always starts with, and the second is retention. How do I make sure that the students stay at my school? Because if I lose them, then lose my revenue, but also the student body and the dynamics and the culture all are harmed because of it. And then thirdly is then completion. And so usually we stop there because those three things are hard enough to do that we think, gosh, if we can just get enough to graduation and have a good graduation rate, we'll just start this all over again. And so the system has been designed that way. And for you to push now the conversation about like what's really beyond completion, it is about career readiness and career outcomes, of which what Aimée talked about, social capital is one of those big components of career readiness that needs to be incorporated. I do think that now more than ever, we're paying attention to the experiences of our first generation, our students on heavy financial aid, our students who come from diverse backgrounds, and really understanding. I mean, I think we intuitively knew that they have a different experience than everyone else, but now we have data to begin to really prove it. Your data, the data that we have by what we use in coming out of Handshake, the first destination survey data that we actually have a summer experience survey that we do at Wake Forest. And so all this data is really reinforcing there are definitely certain students in our community who are less engaged, who are having worse outcomes, and we need to do something about it. I think it's both a moral imperative as well as basically a value proposition imperative to actually say we care about every student equally, and we want them all to have the advantages that we say when we advertise. But I think what happens is the world of university is a complex place, and we can lose sight of that. And so we are now, I think, gathering the information to figure out what to do. And so the good part is that I think we're seeing the problem more clearly. The bad part is that it's probably a little bit more sobering than we would like to say. And we're all worried, as Aimée said, is we don't have enough resources to make changes, or we're really afraid to make transformational change happen at a systemic level. So we're just sort of pushing things around in an incremental, marginal way that still is not making a big enough difference.
Very powerful comments. And I want to give you a chance to comment too, Nichole. You've seen this up close and personal as well. Your perspective on the central challenge.
Yeah. Well, what I kind of wanted to comment on actually is Andy's, talking about how we're looking at persistence and completion and thinking that that's the end. And I think the important part about looking beyond completion is, first of all, we know that it's important to why students are enrolling, but I think it actually, some of these solutions, they help at all stages. So when we're talking to students about, students who are unsure whether they should enroll in college, they're not sure about the value of it. If you can do some of these things like showing the skills that they're going to get and how those are relevant, or showing, the work-based learning or those kinds of experiences, I think you're helping yourself to engage students who maybe have doubts in the first place, or students who are midway through and they're not sure if they should stick with it because they don't know about the relevance. So I think it's not only is it important for its own sake, but it also, I think, is going to help on these other stages that people are already talking about with enrollment and persistence.
So let's pick up on that just a little bit. Thank you all for commenting on that. And of course, I want to start with a little bit of a confession here, right? I served as a university dean, then provost, then president, and focused so much on persistence and completion. And I did that because I thought that was the right thing to do, because I knew that students who complete have different outcomes in terms of earning than students who don't complete. So I'm just want to acknowledge my great colleagues at the University of Utah that really helped make that change happen. And yet now today we're having a conversation that says the finish line isn't actually the completion of a degree. We have to understand, measure, and actually actively improve outcomes beyond completion so that everyone can share equitably in that success. We have with us today people that know a lot about this and are actively in there. I saw a comment go by in the chat of what can we do to help and inspire institutions to be bold and to take big steps rather than, stand on the sidelines and wait. And some of this requires some self-examination, like where are we now? And that doesn't have to be a public thing. And I don't think that it will be successful if it's a ranking thing. I do think it will be successful if we can become a community of continuous improvement that says we care about what happens. We care about equity. And we want everyone to share in that success, just as we focused on everyone sharing in the success of access and completion. So to our experts, maybe Andy, we'll start with you this time. And talk about what you see as actions and tactics that can change these outcomes for students.
Sure. As many people probably, if they followed a little bit, I've been sort of on this drumbeat for a while about career services must die. And that little TEDx talk I did was not designed to be critical necessarily of career services, but to actually get the attention of all the people in higher ed to say the way we're doing it is the way we've done it for decades, and the world has changed. Our students have changed. We have new tools at our fingertips, and we need to change with it. So how might we think about it differently? Recently, a paper that Christine Cruz-Vergara and I just wrote called Metrics and Outcomes That Matter. The reason why we wrote that is that we thought, following John Doerr's book on Measure What Matters and the whole concept of objectives and key results, if you actually get really clear about what you're trying to achieve, your outcomes and how you're going to measure them, your organization will follow and figure out, okay, what do we do to actually achieve these metrics? And one of the things that I think happens in this area of career readiness and then career outcomes is that we've never really had any standards for what we're measuring. And oftentimes the people who are in the academy and administrators who are running a university aren't always thinking about like what matters. Usually the number that they think about is how many jobs or graduate school placements did we have at graduation or 6 months after? Can we get that number? Usually most schools don't do a very good job of even getting that number because students don't want to answer the surveys. So you actually have to put a whole amount of resources to actually make that happen. But then beyond that, there's actually things that you could be measuring while students are in school. There are things that you can measure at graduation, and there are things that you can measure when they're alumni. And actually the Strada research that you're doing is sort of in that range where you're starting to ask alumni, what's the real value you got out of the school that you went to? So I do think that schools have to start to think about what are we really measuring, and can we actually just find a way to assess it, not necessarily go public on it, but at least for ourselves to know how are we doing when it comes to student career readiness and engagement, social capital development, experiential learning. If we actually know that, we can actually intervene while they're at school as opposed to wait till they've graduated and find out, oh, we didn't serve them so well, but tough luck, they've already graduated, we'll find a way to help the next group. It is changing every year in terms of what the market's looking for and how the students are experiencing college, that we actually have to be able to say we can gather this data real time, which actually the whole world's gathering data real time on all of us. Why we can't do that inside an academic environment is a little bit mind numbing, because you're just like, what in the world? How come we can't do it? And so we need to be able to do that better too. So I think that's where it starts. One is, what are we measuring? And two is, are the leaders at the university all involved and care enough that they're willing to actually meet and talk about this a little bit? Would a president or a provost be willing to say, hey, let me get the 4 or 5 people around the team who actually have the most influence on this outcome and agree that this is something we care about, and come up with some ideas on how we might do some things different, which might include tearing apart the structures that we have and trying to do some things actually really differently than we've done before. That's hard for people to do, but I do think actually it starts with leadership, and leadership will. I think there are a lot of schools who are starting to do this now, but it's a long haul thing. It's not something that you just do it, 1 year and then you disband the task force and it's done. I think it's a culture change that you have to be committed to doing for the long haul.
So I just to comment on a couple of those things, I personally am seeing very hopeful signs that have come to us through the pandemic, through this painful journey of realizing the great disparities that there are in health and education. It has opened the door for institutional leaders to join together and become communities of practice around better outcomes beyond completion. I also want to say, for everyone here, I do think some of what makes a measure work and stick is when it's simple and straightforward. When it's very complex and cumbersome, it is difficult to use it, explain it, and make it work for your institution, even inside your institution. So I put a little marker in that, and we'll come back to it. Aimée, I want you to talk a little bit about the actions and solutions that you see and you yourself have implemented.
Yeah, sure. So I have to say, on this topic, I am not only glass half full, I'm like 3/4 full. And it's actually because Braven got started really because of a set of associate deans at San Jose State who knew that we were running these boot camps, who actually came to us and said, can we actually have a tighter partnership? You've never really talked to us fully. And we engaged in a real conversation with them and about a partnership conversation that then led to what is now this credit-bearing course, where we started with 17 students on that campus. We now have worked with over 1,500 students on that campus and are growing astronomically. But it actually started from a dialogue within that was already happening, and them actually saying, hey, let's partner up. And so that group of associate deans, I always think about some of the big innovators in their education. Then from there, we went to Rutgers, New York, because Nancy Cantor is quite a bold leader and really said, look, I really want to see us evolve in this way. And then we got to meet with Naveen Magadhead here in Chicago at National Louis. She said the same thing. And then Jose Luis Cruz at Lehman College and the CUNY system. And I can't say which college is next, but we're going to go into a major partnership with a historically Black college and university where every single one of their students will take the Braven experience in their sophomore year. And it was their leader too who said, you know what, we have got a partner to figure out how to do this in a different way. So I personally believe that there does need to be an evolution. I don't know if it needs to be a full revolution. I'm actually not as inside as others have been on this call, but I do think it's actually a small evolution in terms of how we think about higher education. And to your point, Ruth, what I've realized is that the group of unreal, I mean, truly unreal folks we have the pleasure of partnering with in these different institutions really do care about the outcomes on the back end, but they love to see the leading indicators on the front end. And so for us, that is whether or not a student has had an internship. We use 5 non-cognitive skills that got developed by a team of researchers at Harvard, Stanford, and actually at University of Illinois at Chicago that look at grit, growth mindset, sense of academic and social fit. But there are 2 other parameters that they also helped us look at, which was job search and career search self-efficacy. Are students actually going through the motions of getting a job? And if you're first generation or low-income background, Black or brown, if you do not have someone in your family unit helping you go through that process, it actually just doesn't happen for so many reasons. But then also, it's really important to know those networks are being built as well. But then finally, what we've been able to see from a data standpoint from our partnership with these schools is just last year, I mean, one of the worst economies we could have ever been staring down with a group of students who is highly vulnerable, and we just, like you said, saw it in the pandemic. Our students actually outperformed their peers nationally by 17 percentage points in terms of earning an entire dollar instead of 66 cents on the dollar. And 75% of the class of Braven students in 2020 actually had not only an internship with pay, but an internship that aligned with their career interests on the back end. And then finally, we do look at, it's only an indicator, Nichole, I agree with you fully, but we actually do look at compensation, because if you do not earn that full dollar, it is really hard to recoup it, especially if you're first generation Black or Brown in this country. And our students came out earning on average $55,000 to $60,000 a year, which is groundbreaking to families. 53% of our students actually out earn their parents in 5 semesters, which according to the big American economist is what it looks like to be on the pathway to the American dream. So I have a lot of optimism, Ruth, about what can happen just based on the schools that we've worked with over the last 8 years.
Powerful indicators, Aimée. Congratulations on that success. And I, like you, think it's a luxury to reflect on whether your purpose was fulfilled until you make a living wage and have an income. And at that point, of course, we can reflect on value and purpose, but there's a floor that has to be reached for people. So I think you have very tangible kind of solutions, I think, to offer this discussion. I want to ask one more question, and then we have a great question that's emerged in the chat about overcoming the fear of failure, because that must be what suppresses people from trying more bold things. And I think we ought to talk about that one a little bit. Right before we go there, and maybe this is related, let's think about what you all would say, or whether you've heard faculty express to you, wow, we're not really in the career prep business. We are preparing people to invent their 5th job, not to go to their first job. We are not technical education. We really don't focus on skills per se. We're teaching people to think and solve problems and create jobs in the future. I wonder how you talk to your faculty colleagues. This is probably for you mostly, Andy, and then Aimée and Nichole, how you talk to folks when you're asked that question. So maybe, I don't know, Nichole, if you want to start, if there's anything you want to say about whether you fielded that question before, and then we'll have our other panelists comment.
Yeah, definitely, especially when we've been presenting the data to university leaders. I think that's their biggest fear, is what kind of pushback they're going to get from their faculty members. And so we try to lead with the strengths that we see from alumni, that they're really getting a lot of value out of their classes and their professors, and that they're learning new things, and that those things are important. And we're not saying they're less important, and we're not saying certain majors are more important, but it's really recognizing you don't have to have that limited of a view, I think, to choose either or. Why can't you teach students how to think and how to embed their 5th job, and embed some of these skills and these experiences alongside, and these applied experiences, because that just brings things to life even more. And so I think some of it might be a bandwidth issue as well. Maybe faculty need more support in order to be able to do this along with other things that they're doing. But I think recognizing the tremendous value that they do bring, and honestly, when we're looking at things like mentoring, we see that actually faculty are the #1 mentors of students. Students don't always use the career services, but they're going to class and they're hearing from faculty. And so if they can actually have these conversations with faculty, that is oftentimes the way you're going to reach students that you wouldn't reach in any other way. So faculty really have a key role to play, is what we usually would say.
And the data really support that.
Yes.
Andy, what do you think?
There's a lot of nuance to the question you're asking, from the standpoint of thinking about who your audience is, specifically a faculty. So we tend to sort of group faculty as all being the same, but we all know they're very different, right? There's a difference between being in the sciences versus the arts and humanities versus social sciences. And even within each department, they're very distinctive. And on each campus, they have philosophies they agree or don't agree. So what I think we've tended to try to do is operate at a couple different levels. So one is the level that we have at Wake Forest, this phrasing, we are here to educate the whole person. If educating the whole person is really everything, right? So mind, body, spirit, but also we think about, there's the academic and then there is the vocational, like everything matters. And so if everything does matter, then how much are we really paying attention to, quote unquote, everything? And I think one of the things that that if you actually interview students and you ask them, if you actually had more clarity about where you might go after college, how might that impact you? And what we have found is students are like, that would actually help me feel less stressed. I'd actually perform better in the classroom. I'd actually know why I'm taking what classes I'm taking and how it connects to what I might do later. And it doesn't mean that I'm all going to go to school at the business school because I want to work in business, because many students have started to realize when you actually tell them like the pathway to go from whatever you're studying to where you might go, that your story is not just what you studied in the classroom, it's actually what you did outside of the classroom too. And the more that you actually meet alumni who've actually told their stories in such a way to get to different types of roles and careers, then all of a sudden students realize, wow, I actually create a lot of options by being in this particular field. But we don't talk about those stories because what happens is we end up sort of having like a little bit of tension in that. So what we've tended to do is try to identify individual champions within the faculty who are interested in being partners with us. We're not trying to get every single faculty member because it's not possible. We also have to remember that many faculty members, especially at R1 institutions, they're really compensated and rewarded, and everything they got in their career was to actually be researchers. So it's something to actually, it's a big bait and switch to ask a faculty member, said, I'm banking my whole career on being a great academic researcher. And then now you're telling me I have to also be a great teacher. Some of them aren't great teachers, or they don't have as much passion for it. And then on top, I have to be a great mentor. Some are like, I'll mentor students who actually want to go in the field I want to go into, but I can't be a mentor for every student. So we have to be sensitive to that. Like we can't sort of say just because you met maybe one teacher who was like the superstar, super person teacher, that they're all going to be like that. That's just not realistic. So we try to break it down into smaller things. Now, the one thing that we've learned is that the more that we make it easy for the faculty member by giving them a toolkit of, hey, did you know that these are the kinds of questions your students tend to be asking about careers, and here's how to answer them. And oh, by the way, you can point them to us or to resources on our website that can help them answer those questions. I think all faculty members want to help their students be less stressed and get those answers. They don't want to be the counselor. We don't want them to be the counselor. The other thing is that, oh, by the way, we actually have a bunch of alumni who, if you're willing to give them 10 minutes in your class sometime, just talk about like what they're doing with your history major, then actually their students will know all the things you can do with history major. And what's interesting is actually it's the departments that are actually having declines in enrollment who are most interested in partnering with us. The departments actually where actually they have tons of majors are less interested because like we don't need you as much because our students, our rooms are filled and students seem to be fine. So they don't see a big problem. It's hard for them to actually invest in it. So we have to find other ways to get the students. It's not always going to be the same for every single department. So I think actually, as long as we stay, we're in the business of whole person education and preparation for life, being career ready to be able to actually teach students how to fish for themselves so that they can actually be employable for the rest of their lives. That's incumbent on all of us in higher education to say that's just something we should do. Maybe we didn't do it before, but we can do it going forward. And we should actually sort of fulfill our obligation and our implicit promise to students that that's what you're going to get when you come to school.
So I think you've given us a lot to think about, and obviously have a lot of wisdom and experience in this conversation. Some threads that came up again, that sort of simplicity element, both of measuring outcomes beyond completion and then in helping students on that path and thinking about how people actually learn. And Ken, and these are some comments coming from the chat too, you've just given a lot of perspective there. Aimée, is there anything you want to add on that practical reality of making this happen at an institution or on a campus?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say the thing in the world of Braven is our biggest champions actually are the deans, the associate deans, and actually senior level faculty, and them talking to their peers. I mean, definitely that's what we've seen has worked. And to Andy's point, what we've seen is this real understanding of, yes, we need to teach students how to fish. I do think Braven at the campuses where we work relieves some of the pressure on the faculty member to feel like they have to do it all. They at least know that there is a place in a course that's now offered to help students get over the line. And honestly, a course that brings in professionals from the workforce to coach teams of 5 to 8 students through the Braven experience, and then puts them with a one-on-one mentor, because we usually are partnering with students or seeing students as sophomores or transfer juniors from community college, and giving them that one-to-one mentor towards the back end of college has been really important, actually. I would say especially for students who might actually be in majors like my own, history, where you aren't maybe quite as sure where you might go next. But we've seen the faculty in particular be able to really bridge that gap in communication on the campuses where we are. That doesn't mean that it's been completely perfect all along the way, because I do think people get worried to the point brought up earlier around, like, are we now becoming a career and technical education place? Which that's just not the case. I think we're just at a point where everyone's saying, why not do both? Why can't we do both? We can do both. So I don't know. We, again, have a lot of optimism from the schools where we've been and where we've not watched the faculty honestly get too concerned at all. Or I would actually argue career services, because of the partnership that we have with career services, at least at the campuses where we are, the number of students to career services folks is so small. So we're also figuring out a way, because I saw something in the chat earlier, of helping actually career services to get actually in front of students versus only thinking that students are going to come into the career service building, really trying to flip that model a little bit as well.
It's a great comment. And much of your work, Aimée, is really devoted to this very question that I'm going to ask. So you've commented on it, but I want to hit on it because it came up in the Q&A. And then we are trying to watch questions that are coming in. The chat has been incredibly lively. So we'll try to keep monitoring, and others on this call are helping us a little bit with that as well, and can unmute and join. As an institutional leader, one of the things that I observed with some distress in looking at our own data is that about 20% of the students were using about 80% of the wonderful resources, from things like honors to learning communities to research with a faculty member, and then internships and work-based learning, and even jobs on campus. So you'd see the same student over and over and over, like, I'm having 5 internships and I'm in honors, and then the vast number of students at a large research university that were not gaining those experiences at all, and those learning opportunities, and not seeing themselves there, or not knowing how to access them. That goes back to network and social capital, and probably confidence. I think that thinking about equity and cultural appropriateness, and how we can, the variety of ways we can better open the doors to more equitable use of what an institution offers, and what your experiences and success would say about that. So you want to start, Aimée? We'll give you the first word.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I just think we're watching, I think we all know this, a diversifying America. The colleges are seeing it full force. That is not about to change, however. We're just seeing a growing number of young people who are are identifying as virtual, etc. The moment we have a change in demographic, I do think this is where things do have to evolve. Because again, if you are not coming from a family unit where there are friends that can make introductions for you, parents who can make introductions for you, then actually the career resources, the career experiences are actually completely vitally important to your success on the back end. But I also think that we have to take that to students in a different way, because otherwise, if you're a first generation college student, you have no idea that you actually need those resources, because you think your college degree alone is enough, and it's just simply not. So I do think that we just have to meet students where they are and help bring them the resources. The other thing that I have a ton of optimism around, especially coming out of the summer of racial reckoning of 2020, is how many people actually on the employer side really do want to be involved and to do good. I mean, we had an influx of volunteers. The leadership coach role that I described earlier of coaching a team to 5 to 8 students during the course is a 60 to 80 hour commitment over a semester volunteer role, but it's a skill volunteering role. And just to watch people sign up for that, have a wait list for that, as well as our professional mentoring program, was really heartening. I would also say that we're dealing in the world of a generation of younger Americans who really do want to see things look and be truly different from an equity standpoint. And I just think the doors of higher education is open, and I always say that our higher education institutions, without a doubt, we've always known that they are the path, or one of the great pathways to economic mobility and an American dream. I also deeply believe that they are some of the potential greatest drum majors for justice in this country, given what they have the ability to do. And if we really take this on, a young person who happens to be Black graduating from an institution alongside their white peer should have no gap in terms of earning coming out of the same great institution.
really powerful insights. There's a call to action for every person who works at a university to be part of this. And maybe there's a call to action for every alum and employer to be part of this network and a way to intentionally connect. We did a little bit of this at the University of Utah after participating in the alum survey and seeing that our alums did not feel as connected as they wanted to be. We began to problem solve about, wow, we could probably do two things at once: support our students who don't know those pathways to career and the internship opportunities, and re-engage a large group of alums that could be to institutional benefit. Andy and Nichole, I'd love to hear from you about your thoughts.
Yeah, I was going to bring up the exact same thing, that one of the things we saw, we asked some questions on the survey about how engaged alumni were. And we really found that a lot of alumni were eager to be a resource for current students. They said that they would want to talk to current students about their career or let them do a job shadow. And, you know, having come through it themselves, I think they're a great resource that has not always been tapped into, and they are eager to be able to help students and be involved in other ways than just writing a check, for sure.
Excellent. Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, so on this topic, this is one where it's not easy to do it unless you have real mechanisms that essentially make the student have to learn the processes to do it. So as long as it's extracurricular, and when you have free time, do this. Students, whether you're in the majority or whether you're a student who's not in the majority, you're probably not going to do it. And that it bears fruit in your survey data. And I know people were like shocked, like, can't believe how low like engagement is, or how few students use a career office. Like, that's just the truth. And part of it is the resource point. People are asking, you know, people think if you had more resources, that would make a difference. I'm not always sure that would make the difference either, because you might just have counselors sitting around waiting for people to come to them. So you actually have to really think about it differently. So that was one of the things that drew me to Wake Forest, is when the president and the provost said, I think we might be able to figure out a way to make this so it's curricular, so you could get credit for classes. I said, what do I need to do? And they said, you have to go meet with the head of the counseling department, because they have a little career course that's over demand and probably not as good as it needs to be. And what can you do? And they said, we need more money for more faculty to create better courses, and we can offer it. So I said, that's one thing I think I can do, is actually paint a vision to try to get some money. And so we did that. We hired a very, very gifted teacher. And now we have basically a set of 5 different classes, each 1.5 units of credit, half semester, at least 500 students a year going through these classes. And so what's happened since then is that we're now in discussion with our athletic department, where they're like, I want to have these classes for all my athletes, because so many of our athletes are students of color. So many of them don't have the time to do what all the other students do. I need to help them become career ready, even though most of them aren't going to become pro athletes, even though they want to be. I want them to be really ready. I want them to get the full benefit of coming to Wake Forest. And I want it to be actually an advantage we have at our school for an athlete to come here, then go somewhere else. And so we're putting together that program, which is going to cost some money, and they're going to raise the money, and we're going to actually teach them, and they're going to get credit for it. If they get credit for it, they will do all the work, whether they are first gen or students of color or not. The reality is that they're all going to learn it. And I think that's one of the things. And so another program we're putting together is with first gen students. So what we did is we had a donor who came to us and said, I want to help these students. What can we do? We said, we'll create a leadership and career program. But what we're doing is we're actually creating a core set of now first 6, then eventually 12, and then eventually 24 each year ambassadors who are students who will say, I'm going to be the leader of a posse of 10 other students who I'm going to teach them what I'm learning about this career office. So as career ready as I am, I'm going to help all my friends be that way, right? If the peers help the peers, then actually things start to happen. But if we actually say it's going to be on one particular staff person to help 500 students or something like that, the students don't trust that person unless they're around for 10 years and develop an amazing reputation. Like, you actually have to really find a way to sort of scale and expand and have students be part of the solution, where it becomes part of the culture of the cohort of the students who come in and say, this is just what you do when you come here. And so I do think that we as a sort of industry have to be thinking, like, how do we even help our staff and our faculty of color be put in position where we care enough about their professional development that they'll care about their students' professional development, and they'll say that, hey, this whole school cares about the professional and career development of our sort of communities of or communities who are diverse in a way that I haven't seen in other kinds of places, then everyone starts to realize, oh, this is what we need to do. So I think that it is a real important imperative for us. It's a moral imperative, but it's just sort of like, this is one of those things that we should be doing, and we should be overweighting. So I know in my team, one of the things that we did was we went through a big process where we have read a lot of the books related to racial justice, just trying to make sure that we really empathize and understand and are actually having, honestly, our hearts broken to say, we want to help every student. And it's not just something that's in our head, but it's actually something we really feel. And we're going to make some different decisions about our resources to make that happen. So I really applaud schools who actually are really going long on this and investing. It's not just something you do because society is telling you to do it. It's because actually you feel like this is right. And this is where we need to be going. So anyways, I'm just really passionate about this. I'm glad that we're all trying to figure out ways to make it happen, but we definitely have to over rotate on the resource and the time focus on it then. And it's just another group of students to try to figure out how to help them. Same amount of resources, just stretch the same person in one other way, and maybe it'll work. It's like, this is something you have to really like say, let's be committed to do this for a while.
So I think really great points. That I love the idea of using student ambassadors who could be part of this, and it would be so great if you could pay them a little bit for that too, and maybe you do. I also think there's a lot of thread in the comments about, I'm an under-resourced university, or what do I do to think about this? And so the strategies that we're discussing today come at a variety, there's a variety of ways to do this with different costs and different analysis. I think one of the questions I would like everybody to think about for a minute, I went by a little while ago, and that was, would it be possible to, as we rethink career services, to integrate advising and career early on, right? We're rethinking career. Advisors, we know, are powerful guides to this experience, and powerful in terms of helping students see what matters and how they can gain the experiences that will help them get where they want to go. Would that work? Is that a possibility? And let's also take Andy's challenge. If Andy is figuring out how to get 500 students credit matters a lot, right? We know credit's the coin of the realm in the university. It's the stamp of approval and value. And if the 661 people that signed up for this webinar today, if every one of them got 500 students at their institutions to be part of an experience like this, wow. I'm trying to do the math in my head quickly, but it's a lot. It would be well over 400,000 students, I think, or in that neighborhood from quick math. So let's think about that, right? If everybody can think about creative ways to go at this. Now, what do you think about integrating advising and career? Anybody want to comment on that?
I can tell you that I think that's a great potential solution. They do it well at Tulane. My friend and dear friend and colleague, Amjad Ayobi, runs that office. He loves talking about what he's done and what they've created there. I think it is an opportunity way to have, especially the staff member. They have a big staff group who act as those advisors to help students answer the question at the same time, what might I major in and what kind of careers does that lead to? I think that's definitely one way to go. Different schools have different philosophies about it, so it's not always possible to make that happen. But I think to the extent that the information, I sort of wrote this in the chat, the information you have in the career office about where students go, given what they majored in, that should be in the hands of the academic advisors, and it should be made available to students earlier on. That's one of the things we all talked about, is that the more you make students more aware early on in the process, if I study this, where might I go? Knowing that I could go anywhere, but what are the most likely places students to go? That would be helpful to provide and make more transparent. I do think that for whatever reason, schools either don't have the data, or they're afraid to show the data, or maybe they have the data, but it's buried someplace. I do think that's really important, but having the academic advisors know that's great. But I love the idea of being able to combine it if that's possible.
Well, and I would also say another theme of this day is data, and this, what happens to people after completion? Because once you take a stark look at this yourself, every institutional leader will want to be part of change. Just as we wrap up, I want to say special thanks to our panelists who are making remarkable things happen in the world. Nichole, Aimée, Andy, you're amazing. Thank you for what you do. Thank you all for joining with us in this commitment to ensuring equitable outcomes beyond completion of a degree. This is a powerful opportunity for us to lead the way on being bold. We thank you for joining this discussion, for thinking about so many creative ideas. We also would really like to have your feedback. There's a link that'll be in the chat that gives you a way to say, I like this about the webinar and I wish this could have been different. So please do that. We're in continuous improvement too, and we'll listen to you carefully, and thank you all so much. So stay well, everyone, and we'll see you for a public viewpoint webinar soon. Thanks so much.